everybody, it's Michelle, and today I'm going to show you how I make my homemade bone broth. Bone broth is super good for you. Having that bone content in there adds so many health benefits you wouldn't even believe. We're actually going to be doing this video over the course of a couple of days. Once we get everything into the slow cooker, it's going to have to cook for 24 hours, and that is with chicken bones. And if you have beef bones or something larger, you may want to cook it for 48 hours, because the idea is to liquefy that bone and get it into the broth for its wonderful, wonderful benefits. So step one is to make roast chicken for supper. And I've already done that. And after supper was over, I took all of my bones and put them into this baggie here into the refrigerator. And there is still some meat hanging on there. That's okay. That's going to add flavor to our broth. As long as we've got that good bone content in there, it's going to be excellent. So I just took everything off the bone, made a pot of soup, and I'm ready just to add these into here. And this is the bones of one chicken. It was about a 5-pound chicken or so. And as I was taking everything off the bone, I just went ahead and kind of broke everything up the best that I could. And you've got some nice bones in there. I held on to every bone so that we could get all of that content into our broth. And like I said, it's okay if there is some meat still on the bones. Even some of the skin in there is not going to hurt anything. But we don't want a lot of fat. So I went ahead and picked through anything that there was fat on there. I went ahead and got rid of as much as I could before this stage. That way we won't have to worry about it later. Okay, and also in a mason jar here, I also refrigerated all of my juices and everything that had cooked off of the chicken the day I made the roast chicken in the oven. And as you can see, it's separated. You can put everything straight into your pot here as soon as you're done with supper and you've had the chicken. You can get your bones and everything right in there and start making your broth. But I prefer to do it overnight with the juices here in a jar, because it does solidify and separate that fat off of there for us, and that makes it a lot easier. I'm going to go ahead and scoop that off the best I can and set that aside. And then I can just discard that, and that's that much fat we won't have to worry about skimming out later. But the rest of this we definitely do want in there. You can see it's very congealed, very jelly-like, and that's from the collagen in it, and all of that collagen is going to be super healthy and really good for us. So I'm going to pour all those juices in, all that good collagen, and whatever cooked off of my chicken while I was cooking is in there, pieces of skin or whatever was in there, but that's okay. It's going to add flavor as long as we got off that fat, because once we've cooked this broth for 24 hours, if there was much fat content in there, it's really hard to separate. It doesn't get as solid as it does straight away. It stays kind of gel-like, and a lot of it will go straight through your sieve, and you'll get a lot of fat in your broth, and you don't want that. So now, the next thing I'm going to add in is 2 tablespoons of apple cider vinegar. And you definitely want raw, unfiltered apple cider vinegar, because then you get all those health benefits. And this is going to help break down those bones with the acidity content in there and help start to really liquefy those bones. So next I'm adding in some vegetables, and that's going to add a lot of nutritional value for us, as well as good flavor, because just to be honest with you, if you were drinking just straight bone water, it's not going to taste very good. So we want to flavor that up with some good vegetables. And all I did to these was just scrub them with a vegetable brush. I left the peel on. You guys can see that I didn't take away that outer peel layer, because there's a lot of good nutrient in there. And you can just chunk them up as big as you want. It doesn't really matter. It's all going to liquefy by the time we're done. And I've got 1 medium-sized onion, 2 carrots, and 2 celery stalks. And that's just going to go right in on top of our bones. And the next thing I'm going to add is garlic. And that should have been in with my vegetables that I chopped. I thought I had some chopped garlic in the refrigerator in a jar, but I didn't. So I'm going to be using some dried garlic. If you have minced garlic in the refrigerator or fresh garlic cloves, that's going to be best. I'm adding a tablespoon of the dried garlic. If you do have fresh or minced, then you need to go ahead and put 4 cloves. And if you have fresh, of course, that's going to be best. I thought I had it. I would have made sure to get that if I had known. I would prefer the fresh for sure. I'm going to add 1 tablespoon of black peppercorns, and I went a little scant on that tablespoon. I don't want too much of a peppery flavor. I don't want to make my broth bitter. That's one reason that I stayed with just carrot, celery, and onion for the vegetables. I've played around with this recipe and done it differently. I've added bell pepper. I've added some other things just to see if I could add nutritional value and see how it would turn out, just experimenting with my broth. And I found that really bell peppers and things like that really get bitter tasting once they've cooked for 24 hours or more. So I like to keep it simple with just the onions, carrots, and celery, and I don't want to make it bitter with the pepper either. So I'm just putting a scant tablespoon of those, and you can always add more pepper after when you're using this in soup or drinking it on a cold winter day. I'm also adding a tablespoon of salt, and I'm just using iodized salt because we want to get that iodine in there. Usually I use iodized when I'm cooking, and when I salt at the table I use pink Himalayan salt. And again, that 1 tablespoon is not going to make it very salty tasting, so you can adjust that later on. And then I'm going to add 2 bay leaves. And that is all we need in there. We're just going to cover it with water. I'm using a 6-quart crock pot here. That's about what I usually use for 1 chicken worth of bones to make broth. And I end up adding about 12 cups or 3 quarts of water. I make sure to put enough to completely fill the pot, and that usually turns out to be about 12 cups. Okay, so 12 didn't quite fill it up. I'm going to go ahead and try to fit about 2 more cups. And that looks good. So that made us about 14 cups of water. And we're just going to put a lid on that and cook it on low for 24 hours, but we'll check in a little while and see how it's doing. Okay, so my broth has been cooking for about 18 hours at this point, and I wanted to check in on it and let you guys see where we're at this point. And I'm just going to fish around in there a little bit for some of the bones. And you can see everything is cooking down nicely. So I'm going to see if I can fish out some bones and see how well those are breaking down. And if I can get a hold of them here. And there's one I want. So I'm just going to push this back. I've got my slow cooker on a tile board here to protect my countertops. And I just want to show you guys what we've got going on with this bone so far. So I'm just going to take a fork and mash on those, and I want you guys to see how that bone has just softened so much. And you can break those apart now and get out all of that wonderful healthy marrow that's inside. Let's see what we can do here with this one. Look at that. It just completely pulverizes so easily. And this is going to break down completely, and that's why we actually end up drinking the actual bone in our broth, because it just breaks down to such a fine point that it just completely liquefies by the end of the process. So this is a little bit thicker of a bone here, so let's see what we can do with it. And look at that. It just breaks down. And you can completely, now here's that thick knuckle end. Look at that. Mush. So I'm going to fish out a few more bones and pulverize all of it that I can, and we'll get that back in there. And if we've broken it down even more, that's going to help it liquefy. At this point, we've got about 6 more hours of cooking left to go, and that 6 hours is just going to completely finish off this pulverized bone. Okay, so here is the rest of the bone that I was able to fish out of there, and we're just going to pulverize the rest of that. And when I first started making bone broth, I was absolutely amazed at this process. Just the fact that you actually end up turning this solid bone into a liquid, and you can actually drink bone content. It is so good for you. It is so healthy to actually be able to take in that bone content. It does help strengthen your own bones, which is really good when you're getting a little bit of age on you and you're starting to lose bone density. This is really good for you and will really help strengthen your bones. I have even read cases of people who healed cavities in their teeth with a bone broth regimen. They did add in some other vitamins and supplements in order to do that, but bone broth played a big part in that. And what better way to rebuild and strengthen your bone than by actual bone? Some of these are still a little bit hard, but like I said, we do have 6 hours of cook time left, and that's going to finish it off. We can at least get that open so we get that marrow out into our broth. It's going to be so good. Okay, so we have helped that along significantly. I'm going to pull my slow cooker back in, and we're going to add that crushed bone right back into our broth. 6 more hours of cooking is going to just do wonders for that bone. And you guys can see that rich broth that we're starting to develop already, and that good dark color. We are losing a little bit of moisture though. The long cooking will evaporate some of that out. So I'm just going to add this back in. I've just got some water here. I heated it up in the microwave because I didn't want to add cold and kind of backset my cooking process. So I just added that back in, some hot water, enough to get us back up to the level we started with. Still a dark, rich broth. So I'm going to put the lid back on that, let it continue cooking on low for 6 more hours for a total of 24, and I'll come back at that point and show you what we do next. Okay, our broth has been cooking for 24 hours. So we are ready to strain it and get all of the solids out, and by now most, if not all, of that bone should be completely liquefied. So I've got a couple of strainer scoops here. And I'm going to get out as much of the solids as I can. And I'm going to kind of mash between the two strainers because I don't want to lose any of that broth. Is most of the solids out of there, and we can just discard that, and the rest will come out when we run it through a strainer into a bowl. So I'm going to bring in a large bowl here. And I'm trying to use everything in white so that when I pour that in there you guys can see the rich dark broth that we've ended up with. It is just gorgeous. You can probably see in there now how rich and dark that is. And I've got another strainer here, this time a finer mesh, and we're going to pour it through that, and we're going to end up straining this one more time even after this, and we'll go to even a finer strainer after that. So until we get some of this out of here so it's not so heavy, I'm just going to scoop with a large measuring cup and pour that through. I'm just going to pour right through the strainer, and you can see it's catching a lot of the smaller solids that are in there, so that all we're left with is that beautiful broth. Take a look at that beautiful, dark, rich bone broth. I think that is absolutely gorgeous. But we're not done. Patience is definitely a very important ingredient in this broth. It does take a long time, but I really think it's worth it. And the health benefits are amazing. So, probably won't put the lid on here just yet. You guys can see it's still steaming pretty good. I'm going to leave this out on the counter to come down to room temperature for about an hour or an hour and a half. You definitely don't want to go over that 2-hour mark for food safety reasons. But once it comes down in temperature just a little bit, I'm going to put this in the refrigerator, and it has to stay in there overnight. In the refrigerator overnight, it's going to separate, and if there's any fat content left in there, it will separate and rise to the top and harden a little bit, and be easy for us to go ahead and get the rest of that out of there. Strain it one more time and put it into some freezer jars. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll come back and show you guys how I strain it one more time, and we'll go from there. Okay, so my broth has been in the refrigerator overnight, and any fat that was still left in it has separated and solidified and come to the top. And I want you guys to look how little fat is even left in that, thanks to skimming it off of that hard layer from our first renderings that I had in the jar, if you guys remember that. The first renderings from when we cooked the chicken for supper, and when we skimmed the fat off from that first rendering, it really got rid of a lot of that and kept it from ending up in our final broth. So now I'm just going to take another strainer that I have here. It's a finer mesh than we've been using before. We're getting a little finer mesh every time. And I can just skim that fat off of there and get rid of that. And we're going to run it all through a strainer, again, a very fine strainer, before it goes into the freezer. We want that good healthy bone content, but we don't want that unhealthy fat, so we've got to get rid of that. So now we can set that aside and just discard that. That's that much more fat out of our way. And here is what I'm going to be using for my final strain. This is just the copper wire mesh filter basket from my coffee pot. And when I make coffee, I use the paper filters, as I think most of us do. I rarely use this for coffee at all. It's just in my cabinet sort of as an extra part. So I found a good use for that when I'm making my broth. It's a super fine mesh and it really gets out those final particles. So I'm going to be using some freezer jars, and these are the Ball brand freezer jars, and I just got these at Walmart. This is the pint size. I've used up all of my quarts. They're already in my freezer with bone broth from the last time I made chicken. Okay, so I'm just going to put my mesh filter basket over top of my freezer jar. And with the larger quart size, this fits perfectly, completely down in the top of those. But if you need to, you can strain through this into a larger, maybe large measuring cup or batter bowl or something like that. Through this into that, and then you can just pour straight through into your jars. But I'm going to scoop out of here and pour through my filter basket. We may have to stop a couple of times and clean the fat content out of the filter, because it'll kind of clog up on you sometimes if it gets too much fat. But I don't think we've got a lot of fat content left in this broth today. So I'll make sure to stop at my fill line there, allowing a little bit of room for expansion when it freezes, because I always make sure to freeze my bone broth. You can process it in a pressure canner if you have one of those, but I think it's much easier just to pop it in the freezer. And you can see it running through a little slowly there because of that fat kind of clogging up my fine mesh. So I think I'm going to go ahead and give that a rinse before we continue. And I just rinsed it with a little hot water. I'm going to pop it right back on and keep pouring. So I'm just going to give these a quick wipe down and set those back behind my messy area so I can clean up my mess as I go. And be sure that you have left room in there for expansion. So I'm going to take a little ladle, and some of the ones that were a little more full, I'm going to kind of rob from those just to get a balance and about the same amount in all my jars. Usually when there's a partial jar, I keep that out and I go ahead and heat that up and drink it. And if you add a little bit of salt and black pepper, it is delicious, wonderful to have on a cold winter day or in the fall. I add a little bit of turmeric for mine also when I drink it for the health benefits of that. But that was such a perfect measurement today. I guess I'm going to go ahead and pop them all in the freezer. I'm just going to add on my lids to my freezer jars. And this will keep in the freezer for up to 1 year. But if you keep any out that doesn't go into the freezer today, you're going to need to use that within the next 3 days. And this is so wonderful to make soup with all fall and winter long. I just love to put this in soups. When I first started making bone broth, I really didn't like the taste of the bone broth. But once I figured out I was kind of making it bitter by adding bell pepper and things that I shouldn't have been adding to that, that was kind of what was giving it the bitter taste that I didn't like. I have since simplified the vegetables to just carrots, celery, and onion, a little bit of garlic, and with that I actually now really like the taste of it, and I love to just drink it straight. Heat it in the microwave with salt, pepper, and a little bit of turmeric added. It's delicious. But if you are like I was in the beginning and you don't think it's delicious, then like I often say, hide it. It has wonderful, beautiful benefits. You don't want to miss out on those. It is super healthy. So if you don't like the taste, you can use it in soups, like I said before, where you add so many other flavors, and maybe, you know, in a nice vegetable soup, there's tomato juice in there that mixes with it and kind of hides the flavor of it a little bit. You can use it as the liquid in thicker stews like chili or beef stew or something like that that have such strong flavor that it hides the fact that it's in there. I even use it as the liquid to add to powdered gravy mix, whether it be chicken gravy, turkey gravy, beef gravy, whatever flavor it is. It covers the flavor of this, and you get that health in there that you never know it's even in there. I use it in chicken and dumplings, and sometimes even as the liquid in my cornbread or something like that. Anywhere you can add this liquid in, it's going to be a wonderful health boost for you. Wonderful for building stronger bones as well as your immune system and so many other benefits. You guys saw that we cooked that bone down until it was completely mush. We pulverized it and then let it cook for hours more, and it just completely liquefied. We had very little solid content when we were done. You guys can see here in my mesh strainer by the end, that right there, that little bit in the bottom of that filter is the last of our solid bone content. Everything else is liquid, and it's in here, easy for your body to quickly absorb and take in bone content that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get. So liquefying it into broth is really the only way that you can even take in bone. I think it's amazing, and if you keep that recipe simple, delicious also. guys, get into the kitchen, make roast chicken for supper, and throw those bones into a crock pot and make some wonderful, healthy bone broth. It's time to get started with soups and stews and all of that wonderful comfort food, and also the season that we need that immune boost. So if you do make some of this bone broth, I would love to know about it. You can join me over on my Facebook group, which is called Healthy Minds and Bodies. Also follow my Facebook page, which is called Healthy by Crafty. Don't forget to subscribe to my Healthy channel here on YouTube, and you can also follow me on Pinterest and Instagram, and also over on the blog. I'll leave the links to all of those in the description below, so be sure that you go over and join, follow, subscribe, so that you can keep up with all the healthy things that we're about to do. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.